Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick. Joining me today for a Know Your Foe episode for the Washington football team, and we're going to try and be careful with that this episode, is Mark Bullock. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing very good, thanks. How are you?
Mark's from the UK, if you can't guess. Where are you located in the UK, Mark?
I'm down southwest of London, a couple hours away, near a town called Bristol. Is probably the closest town that people will recognise. So yeah, a couple hours away from London.
All right, very good. Okay, so have you been to any of the London games when they've been there?
I haven't yet. No. I've been meaning to get across to them, but I've always been busy, covering Washington whenever they've been playing. And the one time Washington went over, I wasn't credentialed to go across, so I um I haven't been able to get over there yet. But I do intend to at some point. Hopefully during a bye week that Washington has 1 week, I'll be able to go over and catch a game there.
Okay, and you cover the WFT, and who do you do it for?
The Athletic, well, specifically the Athletic DC.
Okay, outstanding. Those are prime spots, very much in high demand and in competition for those. So, congratulations on securing one of those.
Thank you.
Uh, let's start talking about the WFT. Boy, I'm gonna have a hard time. If you can, we can have a swear jar or whatever for this, but I'm gonna say it at least once during the show. I guarantee you.
I'm sure I probably will as well.
Let's review the off season a little bit, and the biggest acquisitions in the off season. Obviously, we want to talk about the draft a little bit and Chase Young, but start wherever you like in terms of how the Redskins have done some of their rebuilding this off season.
So the obviously the big one is the firing of Jay Gruden and team president Bruce Allen. Bruce Allen had a decade in Washington and was pretty much incompetent and led a pretty horribly run organization through 10 terrible years. So that was a big change. They got rid of him. They brought in Ron Rivera, who's well known for being a top-notch individual and a culture setter. And so that's obviously the biggest acquisition, I suppose. There's the change in head coach and the change in philosophy. And then they've done other things, like they've changed long-time members of staff that were big friends of Dan Snyder that had been there for multiple regimes, like a head trainer like Larry Hess. He's been moved on. Larry Michael, who was the vice president of media stuff, he was moved on, and they brought in Julie Donaldson from NBC Sports Washington, I believe, and she's been doing a good job. They brought in Jason Wright to be the new team president of the business side of things. So they've got a whole new front office structure, which is I suppose, almost more important thing than how they do specifically this year. That's kind of the foundation for building going forward.
I
Um,
certainly agree with that in Baltimore.
yeah, and I think that they're going in the right direction there. Obviously, the guy at the top still has a lot of questions about him, and he always has the ability to blow things up. But it looks like they've got a lot of the right people in place. So that is the big positive for them. In terms of acquisitions on the field with like free agents and such, they didn't do a whole lot of spending. They did go in heavy on Amari Cooper because they wanted to try to find Dwayne Haskins a target, but Cooper ended up taking a big deal to stay in Dallas, and I can kind of understand why. Their biggest acquisition was bringing back cornerback Kendall Fuller, because they lost him in the Alex Smith trade, and then he became a free agent, and they brought him back, and they really like what he's done, or what he can bring to the team, in terms of versatility in the back end and being able to kick inside to nickel, play outside, play some safety. But their other free agents weren't necessarily big names. They signed a guard from Atlanta, Wes Schweitzer, who didn't win a starting job. He ended up playing backup, but with Brandon Sheriff injured currently, and I'm sure we'll get to that. Schweitzer's starting in his spot. They brought in Thomas Davis, who's kind of a long-time Rivera team leader, and tone setter on defense. And they brought in a linebacker from Chicago that was a backup, Kevin Pierre-Louis, who has surprised quite a few people and ended up becoming a starter on this defense, and has played solidly. So that was pretty much their free agency and the off season up until the draft.
All right. And of course, in the draft, they had the number two overall pick in the draft, Chase Young.
Yep.
And where were you on terms of, and maybe what did the Redskins do in terms of trying to trade that pick? There you go. I have one for me.
They I don't think they were ever too serious about trading it. They were obviously open to offers, and if someone had come in, if Miami had come in and offered them their 3 first-round picks and more, then they probably would have taken that. But I think they pretty much early on set out that they wanted Chase Young. Obviously, Ron Rivera is a defensive-minded head coach. He has Jack Del Rio on his staff, and as the defensive coordinator, and Del Rio has experience with a lot of young top pass rushers like Von Miller. He was a defensive coordinator in Denver when Miller was in his second year. Um, he was the head coach in Oakland with the Raiders in Khalil Mack's second year. So they and you know Rivera had Julius Peppers for the longest time, so they know what an elite defensive end can bring them. So I think they were always pretty set on taking Chase Young, and I personally was of that opinion that they should take him as well, unless they got some ludicrous offer from Miami or whoever to trade up to get a quarterback. But I didn't think that was ever that likely. So
It surprised me a little bit. Miami was the team who had the draft capital to do it. They're also smart enough to know they weren't going to get there with just a quarterback.
sure.
And they're very patient in waiting on getting Tua. So they did a wonderful job with that.
Yeah, I thought that if Miami were going to do a deal, they probably would have done it with Detroit at 3, because I had feel like they knew Washington kind of wanted Young, and Washington wasn't able to do the whole bring Tua in and work him out and kind of pretend they really liked him to try to, you know,
Boost the stock. Yeah.
yeah, bluff Miami into thinking they wanted him, but I'm not sure that would have worked anyway. So I thought if Miami were going to trade up, they would have gone to Detroit at 3, and I thought there could have been a deal they could have done there. But I guess they played a pretty good hand there by sticking at 5 and getting the guy they wanted. So, but yeah, I was always of the opinion that they should stick with Chase Young. I feel like he was the best player in the draft, and I felt like he was the most impactful player, certainly non-quarterback, that they could have got in the draft. And with a defensive-minded staff, he's got some good mentors there, and it's the kind of pick that makes everyone better. He improves the talent they've already got on the defensive line. He allows them to only rush 4, get pressure, kind of follow what the model that San Francisco did last year, with Nick Bosa adding to that big defensive line unit. Then they could rush 4, drop the rest, and play coverage and get pressure with 4, force checkdowns and get off the field. So that was kind of a pretty clear path for them to take, and it's the path they've taken, and I think it will work out well for them.
I see Antonio Gibson is already on the field, getting a fair amount of playing. He already has 31 carries this year.
Yep.
So that pick is more or less worked out?
Yeah, he's someone that they really like. I think at the time, myself personally thought it was maybe a round or 2 high for him, just because in college he had very little workload. He only really came on for half a season in terms of the amount of touches he had. I think he only had 30 carries in college, and I think he only had something like 30 catches as well. I can't remember the exact number, but it was a low amount of touches. But he was extremely explosive. He's a fantastic athlete, obviously, and he's someone that they are using as almost a positionless player in the offense. He's listed as a running back, but he lines up in the slot quite a lot, and they move him around. Not too dissimilar to how Scott Turner and the Panthers last year used Curtis Samuel, and occasionally Christian McCaffrey as well, moving those guys around and giving them handoffs on jet sweeps and end arounds and little quick screens and RPOs and that kind of thing, but also some carries up the middle. And so he's been a versatile weapon, but he's shown he still has some development to go, obviously, because he's so new to the position of running back. But he has shown some real good some burst and some explosion, which they lack in the offense.
Let me hold you up for a second there. In terms of pony backfield, do we see some of that in terms of, because obviously defensive coordinators have to respond to the package, the personnel package you put on,
Sure.
not to the formation.
Yep.
So the question is, do the Redskins often put an additional running back as opposed to a fullback on the field with Gibson?
Yes, that is one of the packages that they like to go to. Is they signed J.D. McKusick was another name I forgot to mention in the acquisitions. A running back who was a receiver in college, played for the Seahawks recently and the Lions recently, and they really liked what he's brought. He's in the similar mold, and they kind of use him and Gibson in the backfield at the same time. They'll motion either one out into the slot. They'll sometimes put both out and go empty. So that is a personal package that they should look out for. It's two running backs as opposed to a running back and a fullback.
You mentioned, sorry, go ahead.
In a 21 personnel, but with two running backs rather than a fullback. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so they do run some 21 on the field, but they might make it more look like 11. So if you decide you want to play base defense against that, you might have an unfavorable matchup against someone like the running back in the slot.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what they're trying to do. Is to the whole offense at the moment is built around trying to create matchups for Haskins to make it as easy as possible for him. And they'll move guys like McLaurin, and they'll try to get someone matched up, the number 3 matched up on a linebacker. So they'll move McLaurin into the slot. They'll move McKissick or Gibson. They've got another young receiver, Steven Sims, that they like in there. Basically, they're trying to get someone at 3 matched up on a linebacker and win quickly that way.
Oh, okay. Now, one thing I always like to ask people who are on these shows is about their developmental players. And when I say that, I'm not talking about the guys who are rookies or even in year 2. I'm talking about the guys who are in year 3, and you really got to decide if you can sign them early by just seeing what they have this year. And the guys who are in year 4, who it's Fisher cut bait time if there's a compensatory pick potentially in the offing. I don't know where the Redskins are on that. Take us through some of the important year 3 and year 4 players.
So the main important ones would be the likes of Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne, former first-round picks. They're getting into that kind of range where they need to make a decision on those guys, but I think the decision on those two are pretty obvious that they want to keep hold of those two. Then you're looking at they've got a young left guard in Wes Martin that they drafted a few years ago. They've got a young left tackle in Garon Christian that has been playing, and I've not been too confident about him, but he is someone that they're trying to play young guys like him to see what they have in them this year, and really decide whether these guys are worth persisting with. And Garon Christian is one of those guys at left tackle. Tim Settle is another defensive tackle that is in a similar boat, and you'll likely see more of him with Matt Ioannidis out injured. He tore his bicep, I think, last week against Cleveland, so he's on IR now. So Tim Settle will be the third rotational tackle with Allen and Payne. And then
Pretty stout run defender.
Yes, yeah. He's a guy that in college he ended up on the ground a lot, and I everyone thought he was like a second or a third round pick because he was very penetrative, but he ended up on the ground a lot, and good offensive linemen knew how to pull him off balance. But he has worked on that, and he's a big body. I think he's 330 pounds or something like that, but he's pretty quick for a guy that size. And he does like to penetrate, and sometimes that can get him out of gaps, but sometimes that can make the big play in the backfield. So they do like him, and he has been kind of hidden behind Ioannidis, Payne, and Allen because those three are so strong. But let
me ask you 2 questions about these guys before we get too far on this.
Sure.
So in terms of Settle, first of all, how long are his arms? I see he's 6'3", but does he have arm length issues at all? Because that's something on the interior that the Ravens on the offensive line have struggled with, but they also have seen how easy it is to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I don't think he's a too long arm guy. I think he's 33-inch kind of area.
It's very solid.
Yeah.
I'm really talking. The Ravens have some 31-inch guys on the
Oh,
inside,
okay,
so it's really
yeah,
scary.
okay, yeah. No, I think, yeah, he will probably give them some problems. I would imagine the starting to Allen and Payne will give them more issues. But Settle is a good rotational guy to have in as a backup. And you're right, the size and the quickness along with the arms, the arm length. If you're talking that short inside, then yeah, he will probably give them issues in that regard. Although that's not the style of play he usually goes for, because that's I personally, I don't consider that necessarily that long, but I guess for um, if you're talking about the Ravens guards are 31-inch arms, then perhaps he can go to that.
It's on one side. Tyree Phillips, who's the right guard, has 35-inch arms, so that's really good. He's a tackle
Yeah, yeah,
converted from college. So, but it's the guys at center. Skura's right around 32, 33 inches, 32 and a half maybe,
right,
and at left guard, Bozeman is quite short,
right.
as may do. Has played pretty well. I want to
Okay.
ask you about Jonathan Allen though. I see he's entering his fourth year now. Did they pick up his fifth-year option already?
I don't recall them doing so. No, did they? No, they did. Yes, I think they did.
Okay,
Yes.
for he was first round pick originally, right? So they
Yes, he
they
was a first
had
round pick, 17th overall in 2017.
okay. All right. All right. Well, terrific. Let's move on. I do notice in terms of cap situation that the Redskins and the Ravens, frankly, are both in exceptionally good position for 2021.
Yep.
Which, coming out of a COVID year, I don't know about you, I'm thrilled that the Ravens didn't spend a ton of money on free agents, and they have some contracts they're going to have to sign with their people that are in house already. But I'm very happy that they didn't spend a lot of money with a COVID cap looming in 2021.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that was the intention of Washington. Was thinking. I don't think they were thinking that far ahead in terms of how could this virus impact the cap going forward. I think it was more of it's year one of a new regime, and there's no real point in going splashing the cash on every free agent when um, we're not sure on what we have in guys like Haskins and some of the other guys I mentioned earlier. So I think it was more of a case of Rivera was willing to be patient. He knew that this was going to be a long-term rebuild. So they did go heavy on Amari Cooper, as I mentioned, but that was to try to give Haskins a weapon that, and Cooper is relatively young anyway, so that was to try to give him a weapon alongside McLaurin that he could trust, and give him the best chance to succeed. But outside of that, they have gone very cheap throughout the off season, and it has set them up pretty well going into next year, when more cap can come off the books with Alex Smith's contract. I think there's a get out in Smith's contract next year as well. So
Okay, so that's beyond what I can see on over the cap here. The Redskins are sitting at 50 million next year as is, which is fifth in the entire NFL.
yeah,
And
and they can get out of Alex Smith's contract. I'm not sure exactly what his numbers are in terms of what would be dead on the contract and what would be um, what they would be able to save on the cap, but I know that there is an out there, and then they can save a significant amount.
okay. All right. Well, let's move on to the offensive side. I think people want to hear, certainly about Haskins and
Yep.
and what it's been like to see his growth and what future and usage you see for him.
So it's up and down. He didn't have a good week last week. He probably had his worst week of the season last week. The biggest issues for Haskins has been his mechanics, and it's something that we've known for a while. Like in college, he didn't have particularly good mechanics, but he was still able to deliver some decent throws. But his footwork in the NFL has been particularly bad, and that he can either be sloppy with it sometimes, or he just doesn't have the muscle memory to really demand he does his footwork correctly every rep, and that comes from inexperience. He only started 1 year in college and then got drafted and didn't really start much last year. So he doesn't. He's very raw in terms of mechanics and that kind of thing. So that can lead to a lot of inaccurate throws. He will often sail throws and miss people high, which can be dangerous over the middle, obviously.
Hmm.
And he's it's tough because there is potential there, and people obviously point to the arm strength, but that's always overrated. And when I evaluated Haskins coming out, I saw a quarterback that was more about a strong mental process in the pocket, and he was good at making the correct reads, going through his progressions quickly and efficiently, and finding the right ball, and then letting his receivers make the plays after the catch, and being in time and in rhythm and on script. And when he's able to do that, he's been pretty good. As I say, his mechanics occasionally get sloppy, and he'll miss some throws that he should make. But generally, for the first 2 games of the season, he was generally pretty good at staying on script and finding his targets and getting them the ball that they could make plays after the catch. But the problem for him has been when he has to work off script, or when there's pressure arriving, and he can't just do a natural drop back and then hitch and step up in the pocket and deliver a throw. He doesn't necessarily respond to pressure particularly well.
Okay.
He will often roll out naturally to his left, which is a bit odd. It makes it more difficult for him to throw that way.
For a right-handed quarterback, that's death, I
Exactly.
always say.
And so he gives himself problems with that. But I had been saying for the first 2 weeks that he hadn't been making the mental mistakes. He'd been just inaccurate because of his mechanics. But last week he was making, against the Browns, he threw 3 interceptions, and he made mental mistakes where he was missing some throws. Just mentally, he wasn't making the correct reads. In the first play out of the half, he missed Terry McLaurin. He saw him, he looked straight at him. There was no safety in the picture. He was one-on-one with Denzel Ward, and McLaurin had a step. He could have quite easily led him over the middle or thrown it out in front, and McLaurin would have had a touchdown. But Haskins decided he got to the top of his drop, took 2 hitch steps, and then hesitated and decided not to throw it, and ended up getting sacked. So it wasn't a good week for him last week, but that is the case quite often for young quarterbacks, is that they have their ups and downs, and progress isn't linear. So it's something that I think he will bounce back from, and I believe in his ability when he's on script to process reads quickly and efficiently and find the right ball. But his mechanics let him down from that.
Okay.
And when he's pressured, then he gets off script, and that's when things go really wrong.
Okay, so what I want to ask you about this, and the Ravens just came off a Monday night game where they put up a whirlwind of pressure around Mahomes. They got inside the pocket a little bit, not a whole lot, but it didn't. Whatever they threw that was deceptive at Mahomes, he figured it out immediately.
Yeah.
And so, that's the Ravens' natural state, is to try and generate pressure by scheme. You're encouraging me when you tell me that Haskins is going to have difficulty with some pressure and maybe make some unforced errors. I'm extrapolating what you're saying with that.
Yes.
But do you see the Ravens and the number of stunts they run, the number of off-ball blitzes they run, and the number of simulated pressure drops that they have? They drop 2+ from the line of scrimmage a fair amount.
Yeah.
As something that would give him trouble.
I don't think the simulated pressure will. That was something that the Jets got him with last year, where they would quite often bring sim pressure and dropping guys and rushing 4, but surprising with which 4. But he made adjustments with that at the halftime, and he got better with that. And then he saw that quite a lot down the stretch because of the success the Jets had with that. So I don't think the simulated pressure will have as much of an impact as the extra rushers. And I think the Ravens can be as aggressive as they want to be, because Washington on the outside, they don't have, outside of Terry McLaurin, who's excellent, and in my opinion he's going to be one of the best receivers in the league before long. Outside of him, they don't have anyone that can consistently separate against man coverage. So if the Ravens want to, they can play as aggressive as they want to, send as many rushers, and force Haskins to work off script, because only McLaurin's going to separate consistently. And that will, I think that will be the Ravens' game plan, and I think it will be a successful one, just from how Haskins has played pressure this year. He doesn't handle it particularly well, and with the young guys that they've got on the offensive line, they haven't They have got progressively better through as the season's gone on, but they certainly haven't been anywhere near middle of the road for an offensive line. They have surrendered pressure pretty regularly, and
Talk about
so
the offensive line, position by position, from left to right, if you would.
left tackle is Gron Christian, who they drafted a few years ago to be a backup swing tackle after they lost Ty and Seki to the Bills in free agency. And they wanted him to be the backup to Trent Williams and Morgan Moses because at Louisville they had a weird system where they would play their tackles on switch sides. So the left tackle would play right tackle one series and left tackle the next. So it was a weird system, but he had experience of flipping sides. So they drafted him because he had exceptionally quick feet, but he was very light, and they knew he was a developmental prospect. He was something like 285 coming out, so they knew he needed to put on strength. Um, and then they had a couple of injuries, and he had to play, and he did not look anywhere near ready. And then he got injured himself. Now that was 3 years ago, I think. And he last year got to play a little bit more, and again didn't look ready. He's not strong enough. He couldn't anchor against any kind of power or bull rush.
Hmm.
His hands were just not good enough. His feet are still very quick because that's what his strength is. So he can match speed rushes to the edge, but as soon as they get their hands on him and convert to power, he just struggles. So he isn't someone they ideally want playing, but he has shown up okay the first few weeks of the season. He struggled in week one, but he's shown up a bit better the last couple. Obviously, Myles Garrett is going to beat most left tackles a couple times a game. I think he did okay against him. He did give up a couple sacks, and Garrett had a fantastic play where he came off the edge and stripped the ball out of Haskins' hands and then recovered it himself. And that did not look good for Christian. But outside of those couple plays, the highlight ones, he did okay. But he's someone that can be got after, I think, with probably more of a power rusher than speed. Left guard is Wes Martin, who is almost the opposite of Gron Christian. He's a better technician. He's a bigger guy in terms of. I don't think he weighs significantly more. I think he's around 315, something like that. But he's more of a thicker build, and is a little bit bulkier and better, more fundamentally sound against power rushes, which is probably better for an interior lineman. But he is somewhat of a phone box guard, and if
Wants
they
to play in a phone booth.
yeah, exactly. So he's not someone that can work well in space, and I expected him to develop better this year than he has, and he has struggled. He's probably been the weakest point of the offensive line for the first 3 games. So that left side of the line is very suspect. At center, they've got Chase Roudier, who they like, but he's I don't think he's ever going to be more than a good player. He's the kind of player where if he's like your fourth or third best offensive lineman, you're fine with that. But if he's your second or your first, you're having troubles. He's a fine center. He's athletic enough to reach blocks. He's powerful enough to anchor against nose tackles. But he's not exceptional in any area. He's just sound.
Is he a guy that you expect the Redskins to try and keep after this year? He's in his fourth year now, I see.
Yeah, they. I thought they might have, but they did draft a center in the 6th round last year, or this year, Keith Ishmael, who is a different style of player. He's a smaller, lighter guy that is more of a zone blocking center, and so stylistically he's a little bit different than Roulier. I don't think he necessarily has the size yet to take over. I think he probably needs to put on a bit more weight onto his frame. But I think they did draft him with that in mind of they could use him and move on from Roulier going forward, because I think they quite liked Ishmael. I think they had quite a high grade on him. I think they thought he was more of a 4th-round talent, but they got him in the 6th, so I think they were pretty happy with him.
So Roulier, really quite a value himself. He's a sixth round player they got. Kind of makes me think of Bozeman a little bit in terms of the value
Yeah, they've
that
certainly
pick.
got good value out of Roudier because, as you say, he was a sixth rounder himself, and he replaced Spencer Long, who I believe was a third rounder. So they do quite like Roudier, um, but I think he's someone that they see as less of a priority than Brandon Sheriff at right guard, and there's only so much money they want to spend on the offensive line. So
Hmm.
they are probably more likely to try to commit to Sheriff first, and if they have to go the extra mile to spend on Sheriff, then they might be happy to let Rudier walk and Ishmael take over. So that's center. Right guard would be Sheriff, but he is out dealing with injuries right now. So Wes Schweitzer, the free agent from Atlanta, has taken over. He was meant to battle Wes Martin at left guard for the starting position, but Martin won that battle in camp, which when a second-year offensive lineman that
Not a good
was
sign.
beating a free agent, it's not a good sign. But Schweitzer played pretty well against the Browns last week. He's more of an athlete in a similar mold to Ishmael in that he's more athletic. He can get out on screens, block in space, which I suspect they will try to do some of with the guys like Gibson and McKusick that we talked about earlier. So he's someone that I think he can fill in for a couple of games. The 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 buzz I got out of Atlanta when I asked a few people that know the Falcons was he's a guy that can get you by for a few games, but he's not someone you want starting for 16. So he's solid depth, but I don't think he's someone that they want starting long term. He's probably someone that can be got at. Um, and then right tackle is Morgan Moses, who's been a long-term right tackle for them. They drafted him in the third round to be a left tackle initially, and then they kicked him over to right tackle. And he developed nicely there and looked on his way to becoming one of the top 10 right tackles in the league. And they paid him as such. But he, since that contract, he's had battled some injuries. He's played through them, but they've had a noticeable effect on his play. This year he came in into camp in a lot better shape than he has done in the past. He usually plays at around 3:30. I think he reported to camp at 3:15, but that might be a little bit higher now. But he's actually started the season pretty well as a run blocker. He's been able to, with the lighter weight, he's been able to get out in space and block in space for them. But he hasn't. He always struggles in pass protection because he's so big. Smaller guys can often get their hands on him and get underneath him, and he's not the most quick athlete either. So guys can beat him to the edge quite easily. So he's a decent player. He's a good right tackle. He's not a great right tackle. He's a replaceable player, kind of similar like to Roudier. He's probably a little bit better than Roudier, but he's certainly a player that you could look to replace. But with the other people on the offensive line right now, they kind of overlook that for now.
I mean, it sounds like Sheriff is really the only keeper on the line, the way you've described them here. We don't hear
They
a lot about the line in Baltimore. We're only 40 miles away, but everything's Ravens here and everything's you know WFT there.
Yeah, they had a good thing going a few years ago where Moses suddenly developed nicely and he built a partnership with Sheriff at right guard, and obviously they had Trent Williams at left tackle. And Chase Roudier was looking solid at center, and then he was like the fourth best player on the line, which you're okay with. And then the only real question was at left guard. But now, obviously, Trent Williams had his saga and got traded. Um, Sheriff is hurt. The question at left guard still remains. Roulier is still at center, and Morgan Moses is still at right tackle. But they have gone from being the third and the fourth members of the line to being the first and the second, which you never really want that to happen. So
Right.
it needs more talent on that offensive line for certain, and left tackle is obviously the key spot there.
Okay, we need to probably go a little faster, but I
Okay.
love hearing great about the offensive line, and I love hearing a lot of things. But tell us about the wide receiver core a little bit. We know Uh, some, but tell us what else we need to be
Yeah,
concerned about
so
as Ravens fans.
Terry McLaurin is your biggest concern, and I believe he's absolutely fantastic. He can win in so many ways. He's quick. He's fast. Obviously, he's fast in terms of he can run straight, but he's also quick in that he can work in and out of breaks very quickly and separate naturally with just quickness and being a better athlete, but also with some fantastic route running. He's a very, very good route runner, very precise, and so he can win multiple ways, which makes him an extremely valuable asset. And he's someone that this year they've last year they looked to attack down the field with him. This year, because the protection hasn't been great, they've been looking more underneath and quick game, and part of that is because of Haskins is better with the quick game, and part of it is the protection. But they've been getting the ball in his hands early and letting him run after the catch, and he's been just as good this year, if not better, because he's been able to break tackles and beat people in open field. So McLaurin is, I think, a number one receiver in this league. Sorry, go ahead.
Did he drop to the third round? And I saw he's picked 76th here because of
Yes.
his age.
That was part of it. Also, he didn't have. He was probably the third target in Ohio State. They had Paris Campbell and they had one other guy I can't remember. But they had a bunch of receivers there, so the ball got spread around a lot. So he didn't see a hell of a lot of the ball. And I think that was a particularly deep receiver class a few years ago, where he might have gone second or even first, probably second. But he fell to the third, and I don't even think Washington realized quite what they had, because Jay Gruden, when he was drafted, mentioned how he was the top special teams player on their board. So they were thinking more of a special teams backup receiver role, and then he quickly showed that he was the best receiver on the team. So yeah, he fell probably because of the age and probably because of he didn't quite have the production that you would expect a guy to have in college, but he is certainly producing in the NFL and can be their number one receiver at the X. Outside of him, they have a lot of question marks. Steven Sims was an undrafted free agent last year that made the roster and was initially just a punt returner, but then got some time on the offense and showed some real quickness. He doesn't have the same log speed as McLaurin. He is fast, but he doesn't have the same long speed. But he is very, very quick in and out of breaks, and can shake some defenders in the slot. But he's a little bit undersized. He's not really a Z. He's more of a slot. And then at the Z position, they really struggle. Dontrell Inman, he caught 2 touchdowns last week, but that was more scheme than anything else. They don't really have anyone at the Z that can really separate consistently from man coverage, and they're not really confident in the weapons around Haskins outside of McLaurin, and Sims offers them something, but not enough to be a number 2 just yet.
Do they have a significant financial commitment to Inman? He's been around the league a while. He's almost 32 years old now.
No, they actually signed him in training camp after they had another injury at receiver. I can't remember who. It was the young rookie Antonio Gandy Golden. They drafted in the 4th round, who they like, but they knew he was going to take some development because he played for Liberty in college, so he was a small school
Sure.
guy, and they really like his skill set, but they want to see how that translates to the NFL. So he was always going to be a developmental guy, and then he got injured like the first or second day of training camp, and they had nobody playing the Z, so they went and signed Inman, and he basically, because he was a vet that had a rough idea of what he was doing, he basically won the job because he had no other competition for it. So the depth at receiver is low. They did have another undrafted free agent, Isaiah Wright, this year, who they really liked, again as a special teamer initially, but he made some plays last week when Steven Sims has a toe injury that's bothering him, and he didn't play too many snaps, and Isaiah Wright played in the slot last week and showed a little something, but I don't necessarily think it's anything to be overly concerned of. I think your main threats in the receiving game are going to be McLaurin and then the two running backs.
Okay, so the Washington's had a significant amount of playing time from three tight ends so far this year, and one of the things I like to look at when I first look at a team is how many total snaps of tight end play have they had divided by their total number of offensive snaps. And it looks like about 1.3 per snap. So they're playing, potentially 30% 12 personnel, or they're playing some 13 personnel as well to make up those numbers.
Yep.
Talk about the group a little bit.
So the tight end group is a work in progress, much like the receiving group. The issue with the tight end group is they don't have number one. They don't have the Terry McLaurin that they have the receiving group. They went out and signed Logan Thomas in free agency, the former Virginia Tech quarterback that changed position in the NFL, played tight end for the Lions last year. And they like what he brings, and he seems to have got a connection with Haskins. But he's not a number one tight end. He's not someone that will cause many people issues. And last week, one of Haskins' first interceptions, they ran 4 verticals from a 3-by-1 with Thomas running the crossing vertical, the over. And Haskins it was a cover 3 look from the Browns, and Haskins predetermined, okay, well, the weak side linebacker is going to sink back, but I trust my guy to go get the ball over the top of him. But Logan Thomas didn't have the same explosiveness that they used to have in Jordan Reed to be able to run away from that guy, or the same strength to go up and get the ball over him like a Travis Kelce or someone might. So the linebacker ended up covering it better than Haskins anticipated, and Haskins tried to force it and ended up sailing the throw to the free safety for the interception. So they don't have a tight end that they can reliably trust. And Haskins does like Thomas. They do like Logan Thomas, but to me, he is more of a nice second or maybe third tight end. He's certainly not a number one that you trust to isolate on the backside of a 3-by-1 and run the go or the slant to beat a safety or a linebacker the way that they used to with Jordan Reed. So I don't think he's a particularly big threat. And then behind him is Jeremy Sprinkle, was drafted in the 5th or the 6th round a few years ago. He was meant to be a blocking tight end. He hasn't really become that. He still plays and it's been okay, but he's nothing special. And the third tight end is Marcus Ball, who was an undrafted free agent. I believe he played at Ohio State with Haskins, although I don't think he had much production. And he is a guy that saw more snaps than people anticipated during training camp and made some catches, but again, he's nothing to be particularly concerned about, and he's nothing that
He's actually a 2018 college graduate or draft eligibility guy, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But he was a UDFA, and this is his first playing time this year.
Yeah, I think he was on the practice squad somewhere last year, not with Washington, with someone else.
Maybe Oakland?
Yeah, something like that. And they brought him in because they just have nobody at tight end. And Vernon Davis retired last year. Jordan Reed constantly battled injuries, so they let him go. And Jeremy Sprinkle was basically their only guy. So they signed Logan Thomas, who they liked. They did like Austin Hooper in free agency, but they didn't want to give him the money the Browns did, which I don't necessarily disagree with. So they went with like an undermanned position and trying to run with Logan Thomas and see what he has.
Okay, great stuff. I mean, I think that gives us an idea on the tight end room. Maybe on the running backs, we've heard a little bit already. Like to see the pony backfield. Tell us a little bit about what we're going to see there.
Yeah, so we talked about Gibson and McKusick has been their main package with the running backs. Gibson has been their main guy the last few weeks, but they've been behind in a lot of games. So they haven't been running the ball that much. But Gibson has been getting most of the workloads. McKusick comes in as kind of the third down back. He gets some carries, but he comes in. He was initially signed to be the third down back, and then when they drafted Gibson, they wanted to make this package around those two. where they can have either one play in the slot or either one in the backfield or both in the backfield and do some funky things there. And I don't think we've seen the full extent of what the offensive coordinator Scott Turner wants to do with those two. In the first week, we saw quite a lot of it with it was usually McKusick in the backfield, Gibson in the slot. He'd motion into the backfield, and then they'd have some sort of funky play out of that. One was a triple option with a handoff and inside to McKusick, and with Gibson working around the other side as a pitch option. Another, they had a passing play where they faked a handoff to Gibson up the middle, and McKusick ran a wheel route down the sideline. They do some funky things like that, but they haven't gotten to a hell of a lot of it because they've been behind, and Haskins hasn't been particularly settled. So they've had to simplify the offense a little bit. But that is something that I think they would like to get to more of, and if Haskins shows that he can feel a little bit more comfortable, then perhaps they will. And if I'm not sure how the Ravens will try to match up with 21 personnel with two running backs. If they feel like the Ravens linebackers can be got after, they might go back to that a little bit this week.
I can speak to that a little bit.
Sure.
Cleveland plays a little bit of pony backfield with Hunt and Chubb.
Sure.
And I think it would be a similar situation, but the Cleveland offensive line is also very big and very physical. So they probably would like to play base normally if they thought they were both going to line up in the backfield, like if there was a fullback and a running back.
Sure.
But when you have a smaller guy and one of them is a receiver, then you kind of treat it like 11 personnel, and you might use big nickel to stop it. So you bring a safety at slot corner. Sure, I know you understand that. I'm just trying to explain.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, I think I think that would probably be the way I would treat it as well. I've not seen enough of them as a running threat from that, certainly from that package anyway, that I would respect it with a base front and be worried about the running threat of it. I would certainly treat it as nickel, perhaps a big nickel situation, but I would probably be pretty happy to put even a nickel corner in there if I had a guy that I was comfortable having part of the run fit. I would be looking to go with a nickel and playing coverage.
One of the things historically the Ravens done has been they've been outstanding, probably the best team in the NFL over the last 20 years plus, in terms of stopping the run out of the nickel defense when the team is running 11.
Right.
And they've always had two great interior linemen. They've had the two great edge setters you need, primarily Suggs and Jarrett Johnson.
Yep.
And they've had great inside linebackers. And when you have that core of players at all three, you don't have any problem doing it. But this Ravens team is now trying to refine itself in terms of exactly what they have, and they're not the same strength. I think they still have pretty good, solid interior guys, but they don't have the other players necessary to necessarily stop the run with six, and they have to resort to things like big nickel. They have done that some already this year.
Right. Patrick Queen, how's he doing?
He's been very up and down. Had a terrible game against the Chiefs.
Right.
In the first two games, they were flashy games. He had a couple great splash plays each time. He had a good number of tackles, and he made some bad plays and wasn't in the right place in the run game a lot. He's very, very, very raw. Did not play a lot in college, and while he's done some splashy things in the NFL, a sack, a strip for a fumble, and done some other things, really looks good in pursuit down the line of scrimmage, looks completely lost. If the coverage is behind him, he's got no idea what's going on.
Right. Yeah. I kind of felt I watched a bit of him in college and felt like that was kind of what my evaluation of him was if he is kept clean and allowed to just flow to the ball, his athleticism shines, but he can get caught on blocks and it doesn't always make the right read with the run fits and the coverage, as you say, can play things in front of him and work downhill, but if it gets behind him, he gets a bit lost.
Yeah, one of the problems against the Chiefs, I don't want to harp on this and make this a Ravens show, but he lost the fullback on a shovel pass for a touchdown against the Chiefs. And they were at 3rd and 5 in the 5, so it was a play they could have gotten him off the field.
Yeah.
And he's the only guy that's responsible for Sherman in the middle of the field there. And it might have not worked because they had linemen in the area, but the fact that he failed on it really almost put the game away for the Chiefs at that point. It was their second touchdown, put them up 13-3 at that point.
Right. Yeah. Well. So the running backs would be the main second threat for Washington's offense. I think would be Gibson and McKusick, and they do some things with RPOs. Last week they ran a lot of things to try to get Haskins into rhythm. The first three plays they came out running RPOs. Then
All the way into the mesh RPOs, or do they just do it like a two-handed fake?
Sorry, what was that? I didn't
So
quite catch.
when I hear RPO, and I'm thinking Lamar Jackson, they don't do play action traditionally with the turn your back play action, but they'll
Yeah.
do a lot of two-handed fakes where they don't go all the way to the mesh. That's very common.
Yes.
And they also do some two-handed fakes occasionally where they go all the way to the mesh, and that's the distinction I was looking for.
Yeah. So they do go to the mesh, but that's not particularly common. It was more pre-snap RPOs, where they were looking with a sort of
Gotcha.
swing screen to
Okay.
one side, and the handoff up the middle the other way, and it's more of a numbers pre-snap, and if they respect the screen on the outside, then they hand it off inside. So that was the kind of thing they were looking to run. They ran that first three plays to get Haskins into a rhythm. Then they went to empty sets and got McKusick on a linebacker and hit a quick out. They ran a lot of quick games, things like stick spacing, double slants, slant flats, those kind of things. That is kind of what Haskins is comfortable with right now. It's a very narrowed playbook. It's a very simplified version of what Turner likes to do. And some of what Turner likes to do is the empty stuff, because he has those kind of guys like McKissick and Gibson. And in Carolina, he had Curtis Samuel and Christian McCaffrey and Greg Olsen, guys that you could move around and generate matchups and force defenses to kind of show their hand. Are they playing man, playing zone? Give the quarterback a indication pre-snap, and then let him almost predetermine where he's going to go with the ball. That's kind of what Turner is trying to do here. But it is somewhat limited, and it's trying to just get Haskins into rhythm, finding quick throws, and keep him on script before trying to take the shots down the field, and that's where they had more problems. They haven't been able to hit anything down the field yet.
All right, let's move over to the defensive side. I think you've given us a very good look at the blanket of coverage on the offense. What do they use most common in terms of base and pass defense looks? And I'm really talking about when the other team shows 11 personnel, so kind of standard things. The Ravens obviously show a lot of 12 and even 13 as well.
Yeah, so they have shown a big nickel look against 12 personnel the past couple of weeks. They've mostly worked out of nickel, but it has been nickel or big nickel when a second tight end's in. And they've got a young rookie, Cameron Curl, who they drafted in the seventh round, who played a bit of safety, a bit of corner in college. He's come in and made some nice plays in the run, and mainly played zone.
So I was looking at his usage. Is he primarily then a slot guy they use as a big nickel, or is he really a dime back they bring in on third down?
He's more of a slot guy that uses the big nickel.
Okay.
But in terms of cover, see, it's an odd one because I thought they're bringing him in to match up with two tight ends, and I thought, oh, okay, well they're trying to play some man coverage. But every time he's been in and they've sunk into coverage, it's been zone, and it's been mostly cover three, and he's worked to the flat or quarters, and he's been the kind of curl flat defender. So he hasn't been particularly stressed in coverage. So I'm not sure exactly what he is in coverage, but he's been better than I anticipated fitting the run as a kind of a big nickel.
That's a kind of a really important position with the read option being a threat from Jackson. So the other question that comes up is if the Ravens are in 21 personnel, which is another package they use a lot with Patrick Ricard,
Yep.
two very big-bodied players, would he be a contained guy that they try and have in the game under those circumstances, or can they not afford to do that? Do they really need to have a seventh heavy in the box?
With the injuries they have, Chase Young looks likely to miss the game, and obviously Matt Ioannidis was their third defensive lineman, and he's being out. I would think they will, and given the Ravens' offense being run heavy as it is, I will think they will try to commit to Landon Collins, the strong safety, being in the box a little bit more. than they have been. They've been playing a lot of quarters coverage, so Collins has been a little bit back and trying to fit quickly from deep, which he's had some hit and miss with that. But I think against Baltimore they will probably try to play a little bit more cover three, and keep Collins in the box to really try to keep the numbers set, because when they've been playing quarters, it's given them a bit of a soft edge,
Mhm.
and people have been able to attack the edge, and obviously when you add in the threat of Lamar and the read option and all the movement that the Ravens like to do, it could lead to some big plays. So I think they will probably try to commit to the run and keep Collins in the box as an extra man in the box.
Okay. All right. Interesting stuff. Let's talk positional groups. The defensive line, well known for having lots of number one picks
Yep.
among the pass rushers.
Yeah, well, obviously Chase Young was the latest of that, but before that there was Deron Payne was the number one pick in 2018. Jonathan Allen was the number one pick in 2017, both from Alabama. They had Ryan Kerrigan was the number one pick back in 2011, and he became the franchise leading sack leader in the first game of the season. I think he got past something like 92, 93 sacks.
Dexter
So
Manley, did he pass or who did he pass?
yes, yeah, Dexter Manley. So he's the all-time leader in sacks now. So he's obviously still productive. He's been better this year because he hasn't had to start. Um, because they've had Montez Sweat and Chase Young. That was the other one. Montez Sweat last year was the 2019 first round pick, and so they had five first round picks on that defensive line now, and they had Matt Ioannidis, who was a fifth round pick back in 2016 or 17. 2016, I think, and he has developed fantastically. I think he's one of the more underrated interior defensive linemen in the league, and his pressure rates, they're not Aaron Donald-esque, but they are not. They're in the kind of second group of elite guys behind Aaron Donald, and so he has been very, very good. But so he's going to be a significant miss because of his torn bicep. So, yeah, they have the five first round picks and Matt Ioannidis and Tim Settle as well. Ryan Anderson was a second round pick, and I expect we'll probably see a fair bit of him against Baltimore, because he's not really a pass rusher. He's more of an edge setter. He's a very physical player on the edge. He's an excellent run defender. He reads pulls and attacks them very well,
Hmm.
and takes them on, and quite often knocks a puller back, despite his size. So he's extremely aggressive against the run and very good against the run, and often forces, squeezes the puller and closes the running lane inside. So he's someone that I expect will probably get some good burn against Baltimore, especially with Chase Young probably being out. So yeah, they've got a lot of talent on that defensive line, and some good depth there. Although the depth is being challenged this week with Ioannidis and likely Chase Young out, but the depth should be okay.
I saw Chase Young was not practicing today. He was at practice in a jersey, but not practicing.
Yeah, he has a groin injury. I think the word is that he's likely to miss this. He's considered week to week, but likely to miss this game against the Ravens. So
Week to week is one of those where if he hasn't been out a week yet, he's probably gone for this week.
yeah, for sure. I believe they are planning to not have him for this game, and Rivera has been very conservative with him because he missed. He had a little hamstring pull or something the first few days of training camp, and I think he sat out probably the first 10 days of camp, when he was probably good to go after 4 or 5. But Rivera played it extra cautious, so especially with Chase Young, they will probably look to play cautious with that.
Okay. Let's talk linebackers. I want to start with Montez Sweat in terms of what he brings and how he's looked this year.
Yeah, so he was drafted to be a 3-4 outside linebacker. He's converted to defensive end. He's someone that I think people got a misperception of him in college because he was an exceptional athlete. He's 6'6", with 35-inch arms, something like that. He is
Great wingspan.
long. He is huge, and And he's quick as well. He's very fast. He has a decent get off. So people thought he was this elite speed rusher off the edge, but he's not that. He was very raw as a pass rusher. He was actually a much better run defender. I think he in college. I'm not exactly sure how many, but I think he had something like 20 or 30 tackles for loss in his final year in college. So he was much better run defender in college than pass rusher. And last year he was misused quite a lot. They ended up the only success the defense had last year was with sim pressures, so they ended up dropping into coverage quite a lot. So that didn't help his development as a pass rusher. But he was raw. He didn't really have much of a rush plan. He always went to a little stutter step move to try to get tackles to stop their feet, but he wasn't threatening them in any other way, so tackles weren't worried about that. Last week, I actually wrote a piece that went out today as day of recording about how he's adding rush moves. He added a long arm rush against the Browns last week, where he can use his length, and it's just because of how long his arms are, tackles can't reach him, and he can develop that into being able to drive tackles back, and I think that'll be a valuable weapon for him.
Dictate first contact. Has he been good at that, or any kind of the moves that go with that, like stunting and dictating first contact?
Yes, he can withstand that. He blew up a crack toss last week. Browns tries to run a crack toss at him with Jarvis Landry trying to crack him in, seal him inside, and he just used the shove from Landry as momentum to work into the backfield, and I think he made a 7-yard loss on the tackle on Kareem Hunt in the backfield. So he's someone that is an ascending player and is certainly a lot better this week. I think he's probably coming off what was probably his best game as a pro last week. So he is someone to look out for. Other linebackers, John Bostic has stuck around as the Mike. He was brought in last year because he had played in Greg Minuski's defense with the Colts a few years prior. He's been solid. He's made some flash plays. He's kind of a guy that will take a little bit of a risk to sometimes try to go under blocks and back himself to get there, but and that works sometimes, especially because of the guys they have on the edge that force the run back inside, and the likes of Payne and Allen stopping gaps inside. He can kind of freelance a little bit, but there are times when he tries to go under and the run gets spilled outside and he can't catch up with it. So he's decent but not spectacular. And Kevin Pierre-Louis has been the other main linebacker that's been playing. He was a free agent from Chicago. He's been playing Will, and yeah, I think he can be got after a little bit in coverage. He struggled in the first week. He's been getting better, and he's made some nice plays in the run, but the book on him was that he was meant to be more of a coverage guy, and perhaps that will come as he gets more comfortable in the defense. But he has struggled. They've not given him the easiest assignments. Sometimes he's played some man coverage on guys that he probably shouldn't have to, but when they've played, I think I said earlier, they played a lot of quarters, and he's been one of the underneath zone linebackers, and he's been fine but not spectacular. I don't think it's a group that fills you with confidence, but it's also not a group that you think, oh no, they're going to get exploited every single play.
Okay. Washington been okay on missed tackles this year? I really don't know.
Up front, they've been fine. The secondary guys have missed. That's not necessarily fair on the corners. The safeties have struggled. Landon Collins has had some tough fits because, as I say, they've been trying to play quarters, so he's been trying to fit from deep, and that has led to a couple of misses as he's trying to fill from deep. But Troy Apke has the free safety, who nobody expected to start. But he beat out Sean Davis, who's a free agent, and they ended up cutting Sean Davis. And Atke has been just missing tackles regularly.
Okay.
So he's not someone that I trust on the back end as a tackler or in coverage particularly.
All right, definitely something the Ravens look for is to get their runners to level 2 with double teams, and then they really have to break tackles because they won't always get that good combination block. and be able to work up a level. Sometimes, but not always.
Yeah.
All right. Take us through what we haven't heard about the secondary already. Obviously, you've said a few things about Landon Collins and just now about Apke, but take us through the rest of the secondary.
Yeah, so the corners are have done better than I expected. Kendall Fuller was their big free agent signing. He missed the first 2 weeks, but he came back last week. I thought they were going to use him as more of a slot guy because that's what he was before they traded him, and he was becoming one of the top slot corners in the league. And then he kind of fell out of that in Kansas City. But he played outside almost exclusively last week. So they like him there, and he had a good game. He had a good break up on a third down. He was working cover three, but Austin Hooper, I think, was running a comeback, and he read it well, broke on it, and broke up the pass. So I think he will be a solid player for them. On the other side, you've been using Ronald Darby, who they signed from the Eagles, and he wasn't a Plan A kind of guy. They kind of signed him late in free agency because they needed another body at corner. And he's kind of got burnt twice, but they've also kind of been explainable. In the first game against the Eagles, one, it was a good route from Jalen Rieger, and second, I believe he was meant to have help, or he was expecting help inside from Troy Apke, and he didn't get that help, so Rieger ran past him and got a big pass over the top. And then in week 2, against the Cardinals, Kyler Murray managed to escape pressure, rolling to his right, and kind of on the scramble drill, I think it was Christian Kirk ran by him down the sideline, and then they got a big hit down the sideline. But otherwise, he's been solid, and both have been very good at fitting the run, which surprised. Well, I knew Fuller was good at fitting the run because when he played nickel here before, he was exceptional at doing that. But I wasn't expecting it from Darby, but he has been more physical than I was expecting. In the slot, they've been using Jimmy Moreland, who is a guy I absolutely love. He was a 7th-round pick in 2019. Might have been a 6th. No, I think he was a 7th-round pick in 2019. And he's one of those guys that you just want to root for. He's a little bit undersized, but he brings so much competitiveness, and he's always around the ball. He got I can't remember exactly how many, but he got a huge number of interceptions. He was a ball hawk in college, but he wasn't one that was sitting in zone and cheating. He was, playing up at the line of scrimmage, not afraid to press guys that were 5-6 inches bigger than him and 20 pounds heavier than him. He was in their face and playing press and making good reads and finding the ball and getting it that way. So he's someone I like, but in the slot he has struggled a little bit at times with receivers being able to go both ways, as opposed to when he plays outside, he has the sideline to help him. So that's been a little bit of a transition for him. He has come on a little bit more this year, but still has looked vulnerable at times. But
So the Ravens,
played,
let me just toss
sure.
take on Moreland for here a minute. The Ravens have really 3 slot options that you could see. You could see Marquise Brown playing the slot, which gives you that good change of direction skills and also the good long speed.
Yep.
Definitely we'll see a lot of Mark Andrews in the slot because he really prefers, I think, to line up as a standing receiver than as a tight end in line.
Sure.
And then the third, who we saw a little bit from, and you may have seen on Monday night, is Devin Duvernay.
Yeah.
Very powerful receiver who's just a little bit taller than Jimmy. I'm guessing he might be more. Duvernay might be 6 feet tall.
Right, more than this. I think he's listed at
5'10".
5'10", but I think that's a little bit generous. I think he might be 5'9". He doesn't look 5'10", but I think Moreland would enjoy a battle with Duvernay. I think that would be a bit more of a fun battle personally for me to watch because they're both quite physical players from what I remember of Duvernay. I think Marquise Brown would give him troubles because of the quickness, and I think Moreland would enjoy taking on Mark Andrews, but I think that's something where they might look to get Cameron Curl, as we talked about earlier, as a big nickel. It'll be interesting to see exactly what kind of coverage they go for because they have been playing a lot of quarters early, but it's given them a little bit of an issue on the edge in the run game. And I don't think they could afford to have that kind of issue on the edge against the Ravens, with the added threat of Lamar and everything that they do. So I think they might commit to Collins in the box and play a little more cover three. I don't know whether they want to risk trying to play man coverage with Marquise Brown on the outside. I don't know, because they did play some man against the Cardinals. They would play one lurk or robber or whatever you want to call it, where they show too deep and Collins would drop down inside underneath and try to rob any crossers. And they tried to match up man to man with DeAndre Hopkins, but he doesn't. He is a different physical skill set to Marquise Brown. And Brown, I don't like comparing people to Deshaun Jackson because of how good and how much I respect Jackson as a football player. But Brown is the closest thing I've seen to him. So that is a very different threat and someone that I would want a safety over the top of. So whether they will commit to playing single high and keeping Collins in the box for the run with the threat of Brown over the top, given that Apke at free safety has given up a couple of deep shots already this year. I'm not sure. That's going to be the big debate, is whether they play safer against Brown and go light in the box against Lamar, or whether I think they'll probably lean towards trying to play heavy in the box against Lamar and hope that Apke has a decent day staying over the top.
All right. I always ask the guests, pick a player you think matches up well against the Ravens. I may do it also, but who's the player you think on the Redskins who could give the Ravens a lot of trouble, offense or defense?
I think, well, offensively, Terry McLaurin gives anyone troubles. That's just how highly I rate him, and people will probably say I'm overrating him at this point, but I think with better quarterback play, we'd have seen him. He would have broken 1,000 yards in his rookie year easily. He got 975, I think, last year, and Dwayne Haskins and Case Keenum missed him routinely deep, so he could have easily broken that, and I think he could well break it this year, even with Haskins playing poorly at times. So he's going to give anyone troubles on offense, so that's kind of a generic answer. I think defensively, I know there's some weaknesses on that Ravens offensive line inside. Daron Payne has been good. I've anticipated him being a little bit better than he has been, but it's not that he's been bad. I was expecting him to be very good in Del Rio's defense, because they used to play a lot more two gap last year, and they've been switching to one gap this year. And Payne is someone that has the quickness to penetrate as a one gap defender. But they have played. He has played well. I anticipate him getting better as the year goes on, and he's someone that I think could take advantage of some of those new bodies inside.
All right, fair enough. I appreciate the thoroughness of this. This has been terrific, Mark. Tell us, let's see, we'll get your plugs in first of all. So you work for The Athletic, Twitter handle, any other feeds you wanna promote?
Yeah, Twitter is at Mark Bullock NFL, and all my work can be found either on Twitter or on The Athletic DC. Yeah, that's mainly the things I have to plug.
Are you a good responder on Twitter, or do you find yourself like I don't know about I don't know about everybody, but Twitter is a huge time waster for me. Unfortunately, I'm kind of in semi-retirement here. I kind of enjoy it, but not everybody can afford to spend 4 hours on Twitter per day.
Yeah, no, I try my best to respond to every person that tweets me so I can't always get to everyone, but I do try my best to get to the vast majority.
All right. Really appreciate having you on the show, Mark. Let me talk a little bit about film study. Obviously, next week we have still a By the Numbers episode coming out that will be after this one. Look back at the Chiefs game and look forward a little bit ahead to the Washington football team in terms of some key numbers we see. And that goes usually outside of the normal metrics that you get in a box score. So we'll hopefully bring you something new there. Hope you'll give that a chance. And of course, the offensive line article should be up shortly after this, if not before, if you're looking for scoring. Mark, thanks again for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.